talking about Cemetery Girl by David Bell. If I've posted these in any semblance of order, you will know I just reviewed In 27 Days, and I wasn't a huge fan. I wasn't a huge fan of this one either. However, it was for vastly different reasons. In 27 Days just did not meet my expectations for a well-executed novel. Cemetery Girl, it just wasn't my genre. I thought it was going to be, but it turned out to be a little bit more literary fiction, and I prefer commercial fiction. So I cannot say this is a bad book. It just wasn't a good book for me. That said, whoops, library book, sorry. Cemetery Girl is about a young girl named Caitlin who was kidnapped when she was 12 and reappears when she's 16. However, when she is discovered, she refuses to talk about what happened to her, and she refuses to testify against the guy that they arrest for abducting her. Then her father, Tom, takes it upon himself to find answers. That is why I picked up the book. Because, I mean, maybe there's something wrong with me, although I'm going to blame it on Carolyn B. Cooney and her Face on the Milk Carton series. Like, I feel like it imprinted upon me at a very early age a fascination with disappearing children. I will pick up a book if it has to do with a kidnapping. Hence why I picked this one up. It breaks my heart when I'm really looking forward to something and then I can't read it. The book is about 400 pages. Caitlin does not appear until halfway through the book. So that means for half of the book, I have to slog through the mire of whatever drama is going on in Tom's life. And on top of that, I don't even like Caitlin that much. I don't like Caitlin. I don't like her dad Tom. I don't like her mom Abby. I don't like Uncle Buster. And so this is quite funny, because if you know me, you know I'm not a dog person. The only character in this book that I feel sorry for is their dog, Frosty. Because at the very beginning of the novel, Tom is taking Frosty to the pound to potentially be put down. And I'm just like, what did that dog do to you? The whole reason was because it was essentially Caitlin's dog, and Abby, the mother, couldn't stand to look at it anymore because Caitlin had disappeared while taking Frosty for a walk, and so Abby just associates this dog with Caitlin and with her disappearance. The dog didn't even make an appearance throughout the book. So the first, I guess there's a prologue-ish, and then so the first chapter is Tom in the process of taking Frosty to the pound, right? And then we have another chapter to something else, and then Frosty is mentioned again, and Tom is trying to get Frosty back, but he's been adopted. And then when Caitlin appears, she's like, well, where's my dog? And at the very end of the book, spoiler, Frosty reappears! So he's not even a major player, yet he's the only one I cared about. Oh my gosh. I felt like, I did like Tom. I did. Although, he didn't develop in the way I'd expected. Like, his actions did not go the way I thought they would. But I can't really blame... Well, I can't really blame him, of course, because this is all about the writer. If Caitlin does not reappear until halfway through the novel, there's not a lot of time left for Tom to start playing detective. So I'll give him some grace. So, I liked Tom, and I particularly if I compare him with Abby, I feel like Tom was doing things the right way, whereas Abby was a bit insensitive to the whole situation, which I'll get into. Let me get into the plot a little bit, then I'll talk about characters a little bit, and then I'll talk about everything else for a lot of bit, okay? I thought the plot was going to start with, or maybe not start immediately, but pretty soon with Caitlin reappearing, and it doesn't. The thing is, it's been 4 years since she disappeared. We are given an opening chapter about kind of how manipulative she can be, which I don't think sets us up for success. But anyways, we get this idea about what kind of person Caitlin is. And then we jump into, hey, she's been gone for 4 years, and Tom and Abby are having difficulties in their marriage. Abby, even before Caitlin had disappeared, had gotten involved in church. And then after Caitlin disappeared, that's where she leaned. Like, that's where she went for solace and comfort. And through, her pastor and whatever else, she decided to take steps to move on, which is kind of also where giving away Frosty comes in, because she's ready to clear out Caitlin's room. She's ready to hold a memorial service for Caitlin, like to essentially bury her and say goodbye. So we have this drama. As much as I didn't like it, the more I think about it, the more I guess I can say this is a good piece of writing, which, as I've tried to express, the book is not a bad book. It's just not a good book for me. Which means the writing is pretty good. So here's an instance of writing that made me want to claw my eyes out, but it's probably because it was just done really well in portraying the disintegration of a marriage. Abby has been relying heavily on the church, and Tom's like, I don't do religion, and then he suspects her of having an affair with her pastor, and in any case, Abby's like, this isn't working. It's time for me to move out. She is in the process of getting her stuff and moving it somewhere else, but she's also like, you need to see somebody. And Tom, this entire time, it's like, I don't need to. I don't want to see a therapist. I don't need help. After Caitlin had gone missing, he and Abby had gotten in contact with a lawyer/advocate named Leanne, who helps people in situations with missing children. After the funeral, he gets a call from Leanne, and she's like, you need to meet me at the strip club. Along with her is one of the strippers who has information about Caitlin. She tells this story about 6 months prior, Caitlin and this man had come in and basically verifies that Caitlin is alive. This is the catalyst for Caitlin's return. He is basically like, it's probably not good for me to keep you anymore. Like, let me let you go, and then we'll go from there. This book, it was really hard for me to read. It was well written as it was. For me, it was so slow, and so it's just really hard for me to remember it because it's just painful. Anyways, the stripper also gives Tom the name of a counselor that she has seen, and this is all just before Caitlin reappears, okay? It's just, maybe I don't understand therapy. Maybe this is not an accurate depiction of therapy. This was just so unhelpful. Mostly he's meeting with this woman because he has a feeling that stripper Tracy knows more than she's saying. She gave him Susan, the counselor's card. He's like, well, maybe Susan has the information Tracy won't give me. So he meets with her, but their conversations go nowhere. It's one of those situations where I tell you something, and then I ask you your opinion on it, and then you ask me a question back. Like, well, what do you think? Books cannot move at the speed of life, alright? They need to move at the speed of light. So cyclical conversations are not helping us. We need to move forward, and instead, we're just standing still, because Tom's response is always, well, maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe this was a wrong decision. I don't need counseling. So I'm like, what point did this conversation have, period? You didn't give him information about Caitlin or her abductor, and you didn't solve anything. Like, there's no resolution. He doesn't feel better. So yeah, Caitlin appears, and as I said in the summary, she won't talk about what happened. And not only will she not talk about what happened, like, she does not talk, period. Every now and again, we get an outburst. She makes Tom promise her that he will not ask her where she's been or anything about that. And then when John Coulter who adopted her, when he is arrested, she is just like, I gotta see him, but I'm not gonna say anything about whether or not he is the guy. I'm not gonna say anything about what he did to me. From this halfway mark, when she reappears, that's all we get is circles. So we get circles in the beginning with a bunch of drama surrounding Tom, and we get a bunch of circles in the end about what went on with Caitlin. So when are we gonna move forward? If I started here, and I circled back around to here, and then I met that circle with the second circle, like, how am I moving forward? I'm just going like this, you know? And so here's our spoiler. The spoiler really is, there is no spoiler, because I can't really trust the information I'm given, which, in a way, I like. I like an unreliable narrator. I think they're so interesting. You know, they make me think, like, do I trust them or do I not trust them? Eventually, Tom tracks down Coulter, who has been released from prison, and he's like, look, you give me information, I'll give you Caitlin back. Because even though Coulter had released Caitlin, because he's a pedophile, so he had a history of abducting children, which is where Tracy comes in. So I'm sorry, I forgot to preface that with a spoiler, but Tracy was one of his past abductees. He's also the father of her child. Coulter had released Caitlin only because he was like, maybe it's just not a good idea with all the spotlight on me, but he was in love with her. Like, he thought he could start over in another place with another girl, but I guess he decided he couldn't. Like, Caitlin was the one, even though he's in his 40s or 50s and she's 16. Whatever. People are screwy. Then Tom goes to Caitlin and he's like, if you give me information, I'll bring you to John. She tells him a little bit of something, and then she's like, well, that was basically a down payment. Tom brings Caitlin to meet up with John, and a little bit that we're given is that Tom has a brother named Buster. Buster had a drug problem. And so this is a little fuzzy for me. But in some way, his drug dealer was associated with John Coulter. And I don't remember if Buster actually knew about Coulter's pedophilia or what. But anyway, so he kind of dropped hints about having a niece to his drug dealer, who I guess then kind of talked to Coulter. And then, so leading up to Caitlin's abduction, he integrates himself into her life. Like, he gets her familiar with him. And then there's one day that he's like, hey, what's up? Her dog, Frosty, had run away, and he's like, I'll help you find him. And then it just goes from there. He gets her in his car, still under the pretense of finding the dog, and then he gets her to his house. And then at some point he's like, I think it's a little late for me to return you, so I'm just going to lock you in my basement. And manipulates her into thinking that her parents don't care about her, and then gets her to fall in love with him, and then he falls in love with her in return. That all isn't really so bad. I think what I don't buy, and this is going towards character, okay, so I know I'm jumping in ahead because I really want to stay with plot. But as I mentioned, I didn't really like Caitlin. From the get-go, she was not a sympathetic character. Huge spoiler. If there really is a spoiler, this is it. And it's that Caitlin was really just apathetic about the whole thing. She went with him because she would get a rush out of doing something she wasn't supposed to do. She was at his house, and she kind of knew, hey, this isn't the safest situation, but I'm just going to go with it. I'm not going to give much thought to my parents. That's kind of the feeling we get, because that is what Coulter says. Again, he's a bit unreliable as well, but he's just like, do you really think she missed you? You just get the idea that Caitlin, especially because she has this habit of blanking out, which I wish had been explored further, because we're going to backtrack a bit. Tracy's story was that Coulter and Caitlin had come to the strip joint that she worked at, and so she had been paid to give Coulter a lap dance, and Caitlin was watching, right? But she had this totally blank look on her face. So we're kind of maybe thinking that there was something wrong Like, maybe she'd been brainwashed, maybe, I don't know. There was something going on there that she wasn't trying to escape, but it's like she wasn't completely engaged, but she wasn't really necessarily afraid of him. So that's kind of the impression that we get of Caitlin, is that she just has no regard for others. And in a way, it reminds me of a sociopath, where she has no emotion, no empathy. She just does it. And even as a 12-year-old, you'd think she has to have some attachment for her parents, some sense of right and wrong. But what she tells you is, yeah, I do know right from wrong, but I really don't care. And it's not like, you know, a moody teenager who just wants to buck the system. It's just like, yeah, I know going with a stranger and getting in his car is not a good idea. You know, going in his house and hanging out for a while, probably not that smart. Or actually, not even probably, but I shouldn't be doing it. But you know what? This is what I'm going to do. And so I had a really hard time believing that she could be convinced so easily that her parents don't care about her, because I felt like from the beginning, she didn't care if her parents cared about her. Like, from the very beginning, where we get that first glimpse into her character, because there's this story about how she's not supposed to cross the street by herself. And her father sees her crossing the street and almost gets hit by a car. She's 6, okay? And then when she comes in for dinner, he confronts her about it, and she straight up lies with a straight face. And he tells her, I saw you do it. And she's like, it wasn't me. So that's just the impression we have of her. And it continues. So it's like there's no point that we ever got that she was a normal human being with normal human emotions. Pardon me while I breathe deep. I have a really big problem with characters who I can't relate to, I can't attach to, I can't sympathize with. Like, isn't that what I'm supposed to be getting from here? I'm supposed to want her to come back. I'm supposed to want this family to heal, to get back together. Now that convolutedness is over, we'll wrap it up nice and neat with a little bow where plans go awry, John gets arrested, and Caitlin goes home with her dad, and they start the process of healing. If you hadn't caught on, Tom did not do a whole lot of investigating. So I felt like this was incredibly misleading. Not only did Caitlin not show up until, like, this much through the novel, but Tom's detective work, I honestly thought that it was going to be a case of police aren't doing what I want them to do, so I'm going to solve the mystery. I'm the dad, I need to get justice for my kid, so I'm taking it into my own hands. And in a sense, that is what happened, but I guess it just all went so fast. Like, we kept being told, don't rush this, don't push this, like, she's had 4 years of torture and brainwashing and whatnot, so it's going to take a while for things to get back to normal for her to start feeling like this is her home. So stop pushing her, stop asking questions, and let us do our jobs. And then, like, 2 days later, it's all done. Maybe not 2, maybe a week later, it's all over. I didn't buy the timeline. I didn't buy what they led me to believe Tom was to pursue. Like, I thought somehow he was gonna be the detective and he was gonna solve everything. But just like his conversation with his therapist Susan, it was just like this. You know, it's like, oh, we're going to go find Coulter at his house, and we're going to confront him, and we're going to cause trouble, and then I'm going to get in a fight with my brother, with Buster, and he's going to kick me out of the car. I'm going to suspect Buster of being part of this, or maybe even being the perpetrator. And then I'm going to go back to Tom, and then I'm going to go to Caitlin, and then it's all going to be over. I'm going to bring them together, and voila. Like, it just, where was the detective work? You know, well, technically, I guess you could say he talked to Leanne, and that's when he found out the full extent of Tracy's relationship with Coulter. He talked with Susan, who gave him even more information about Tracy and Coulter, and then he went to Coulter. But that's not really detective work. You know, that's connecting the dots. That's me being like, Mom, where's my shoe? Oh, I don't know. Ask your sister. I think she saw it last. Hey, sister, where's my shoe? Well, my dog had it, so go find my dog. Like, I found my shoe with the dog. I just asked a question that led me to another, led me to another. Like, that's not detective work. I mean, maybe in its purest form, but it's not what I was wanting. Here's the thing. Caitlin disappeared from a cemetery. The book, after our little prologue, showing us what kind of a sociopath she was as a 6-year-old, Tom has been tasked by Abby to get rid of Frosty. He takes Frosty to the park first, and the park is connected to the cemetery. So my thought is, this is where we're gonna find Caitlin, because it's just a really good setup for when you least expect it. You know, and it's coming full circle. Like, for some reason, this is where she was abducted from, and then this is also where they're going to choose to drop her off, or where she's going to reappear at. But it wasn't. So, but I thought if that's how we'd opened, given a little glimpse, and we're feeling sorry for the fact that their daughter has been gone for so long, and then there she is, and then we go on this journey of finding answers, I think that would have been a much more dynamic book than what I got. Let's move on to character. I've already talked about Caitlin. I really want to talk about Abby, her mother. Here's the deal. I go to church, I believe in God, and I'm a Christian. And so it really bothers me when Christianity and church is portrayed in such a cynical, negative light. But I wasn't really sure where Belle was going to go with it. From the get-go, the whole scene, Abby's faith and her reliance on the church, is viewed as a huge negative, like almost in a cultish way. I wanted to look at both sides. Tom doesn't believe in God. He thinks church is a waste of time. So of course he's going to see all of her behaviors as unnecessary and out of order. She should not be listening to all these wackadoodles when it comes to how she should move on with her life. Like, I totally understand where he's coming from. But you know what? I also understand where someone with a faith comes from too. Like, God is a great place to turn to, a great person to turn to when you're in need, when you're hurting. The congregation or the pastors, you know, it's a great support system. So I was like, what's going to happen? Like, who's really going to be right in all of this? And I still can't tell you, because from the get-go, it's really portrayed in a super negative light. And maybe everyone in this book is an unreliable narrator. But Tom, he hates that Pastor Chris, because they do this little memorial service, and he hates that Pastor Chris puts words in his mouth, like things that he's never said. And then on top of that, he's like, I hate that they're making us do this memorial service, and that you are so quick to move on, even though 4 years, I don't know, is 4 years quick? Anyways, like, he just doesn't like the influence they're having on her in her decision to maybe move forward, because he is not ready to move forward, which I'm not saying either one is good or bad. I don't have kids. I don't know how this would feel, but they're just on opposing sides of what to do in the absence of their daughter. In terms of this whole church thing and of Abby, I am prone to believe that, yes, she is having some sort of an affair with Pastor Chris, which really bothers me. Why do all church pastors have to have zero morals? And then why do all church organizations have to be like cults? But Abby, like, I never really know where she's coming from, because maybe that's where Caitlin gets her sociopathness from. Because Abby has no emotion. I have no idea what Caitlin, what her true motivations are. How is she feeling? Because all the way up until Caitlin reappears, Abby's like, I'm moving on. Like, I'm essentially burying her. I'm saying goodbye, and I want nothing about her around me. And then Caitlin reappears, and Abby is like, I don't know if I can do this. And then all of a sudden, she's like, I can't wait to see my kid. I need to be supportive of my kid. Blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, but how do you really feel? I never got into her head. Except Tom was the only one, which makes sense because he's the narrator. But I feel like you should be able to get into all the characters' heads. You should get to understand why they do what they do. But Abby just felt really flat. Like everything she was doing was because someone in her church told her to do it. And that's just not effective for me. I really liked Detective Ryan, because just like with church, I feel like writers really like to put police officers and detectives in a really bad light. Some police officers and detectives are terrible at their jobs. They're lazy, biased, and everything else. But not all of them are. So I really appreciated how Detective Ryan, when he was needed, he got the job done. He didn't always agree with Tom, but he was looking at it through the lens of someone with experience. Do I listen to a stripper story? Do I give it any credibility? I don't know. It sounds rehearsed. It seems like there's more to the story. And of course, Tom is like, no, she's telling the truth. We gotta get this sketch out there of this dude. Of course, over 4 years, other cases are gonna come up. And so, much to Tom's dismay, Detective Ryan can't give it his complete focus. All of these agencies that had come in to help with the search, and of course, they can't continue to give it all of their attention, so they're gonna pull out after a certain time. But I think that's reasonable. I think that's normal. But then, once Caitlin reappeared, or once they got this information from Tracy, it was full steam ahead again. And there we went. Of course, they maybe moved at a different pace than Tom wanted, and that's why he decided to take matters into his own hands. But I liked Ryan. I felt like he was a really realistic character. Maybe I should say that I liked Frosty. I liked Detective Ryan, even though he was kind of abrasive. And I guess I liked Tom. I mean, I definitely saw where he was coming from, because that's another thing that Belle did really well, was capturing this sense of grief. You really felt like life had stopped for these people, and things were splintering apart, and they just didn't know how to move forward. Like, at what point, that was the question I kept asking myself, at what point do you say, maybe I need to make changes to my child's room? Are they going to come back? Are they not going to come back? You saw both sides. You saw someone who thought this is the way to start walking forward again. Like, I've been standing still. And then there's someone else who's like, but if we do everything you do, we're essentially forgetting her. Like, we're giving her up. Because I did not like Abby, I did tend to lean more towards Tom's perspective when it came to moving on after Caitlin. This is not my favorite review. Frustrates the bejesus out of me. I'm just going to stop here, and I hope I didn't bore you too much, that I didn't confuse you too much. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I would recommend this to people who like literary fiction, who don't mind a slow plot, who don't mind wooden characters, who don't mind getting no answers. Good day to you and yours. I will see you, hopefully, with a more exciting review. Bye.